Did you know that one of the most famous speeches in movie history was almost cut before anyone ever heard it? The moment where a man screams out of his window and millions follow. That almost never happened. Network is a film that felt like fiction in 1976. Today, it feels like the evening news. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Network. Number 20. The movie that predicted the future. Here is something that will make your jaw drop. When Network came out in 1976, most people laughed at it. They called it crazy. They called it too extreme. Television executives shook their heads and said, "This could never happen." Critics wrote long reviews explaining why the world shown in Network was impossible. A news anchor having a breakdown on live television, a network turning that breakdown into entertainment, terrorists being given their own TV show. Too wild, too ridiculous, too far from reality. And yet, here we are. Decades later, and almost everything Sidney Lumet and writer Paddy Chayefsky put into that film has come true in some form or another. Reality television built its entire business model on the idea of watching real people fall apart. News networks have turned outrage and spectacle into their biggest products. Ratings have become more important than truth. Hosts have become performers. Journalism has become theater. People who work inside television today sometimes watch Network and feel a cold chill run down their spine, not because it is a great old movie, but because it describes exactly what they do every single day. The screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky spent years researching the television industry before writing the script. He interviewed executives, producers, and anchors. He studied how the business worked from the inside, and what he found horrified him. So he turned his horror into satire. He made it bigger, louder, and more outrageous because he thought exaggeration would make people see the truth more clearly. What he never imagined was that real life would eventually catch up to his exaggeration and then pass it. Network was not predicting the future. It was describing a direction already chosen. The world just had not arrived there yet. What felt like satire in 1976 became a documentary by the 21st century. Number 19. The screenwriter who rewrote Hollywood, Paddy Chayefsky, was not your average Hollywood writer. He was fierce, brilliant, and completely unafraid to say things that made people uncomfortable. By the time he wrote Network, he had already won Academy Awards for his earlier screenplays. He was respected, he was powerful, and he used that power in a very unusual way. He kept total control of his script. Most screenwriters in Hollywood hand over their work and watch it get changed, chopped, and transformed by directors, producers, and studio executives. Characters disappear. Dialogue gets softened. Sharp edges get sanded down until the story is smooth and safe and forgettable. Chayefsky refused to let that happen to Network. He fought hard to protect every single word. He negotiated his contract so carefully that his screenplay could not be changed without his approval. When director Sidney Lumet came on board, the two men sat together and went through the script line by line. Lumet later said that he and Chayefsky barely changed anything. Almost every word you hear in the finished film is exactly what Chayefsky wrote on the page. That is almost unheard of in Hollywood. It happens almost never. And the result is a script so precise, so sharp, and so perfectly constructed that film schools around the world still teach it today. Students study it not just for its ideas, but for its craft, the way each scene builds on the last, the way characters reveal themselves through what they say and what they refuse to say. Chayefsky believed that words were weapons, and he wielded them with surgical precision. He did not write movies to entertain. He wrote movies to disturb people into thinking. And with Network, he disturbed an entire generation. What felt like angry fiction was actually careful, disciplined art. Number 18. Peter Finch's Last Performance. There are movies where an actor gives everything they have, and then there is Network, where Peter Finch gave everything, and then never acted again. Peter Finch played Howard Beale, the news anchor who loses his mind on live television and becomes a prophet of rage. It is one of the most powerful performances in cinema history. Finch was electric in every scene. He was terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. You believed every word he said. You felt his exhaustion, his grief, and his strange electric energy. The performance was so complete, so total, that it seemed to take something from him that could never be put back. Filming ended. The movie was edited. The premiere was planned. And then, on January 14, 1977, before Network was even released to the public, Peter Finch collapsed in the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel and died of a massive heart attack. He was 60 years old. The world lost him before it ever had the chance to applaud him for Howard Beale. And then something extraordinary happened. When the Academy Awards were announced, Peter Finch was nominated for Best Actor. And he won. He became the first actor in history to win the Academy Award for Best Actor posthumously, meaning after death. His wife accepted the award on his behalf, standing at that podium while the entire room held its breath. The applause that night felt different. It felt like something more than appreciation. It felt like grief. The performance that earned him that award was his final gift to the world, and the world received it imperfectly and heartbrokenly, without him there to hold it. That was not just acting. That was a life poured into a role. Number 17. Faye Dunaway's complicated role. Faye Dunaway played Diana Christensen, a ruthless television executive who sees human suffering as programming opportunity. She is the character audiences love to hate. She is calculating, brilliant, emotionally frozen, and terrifyingly competent at her terrible job. Dunaway brought every bit of her intensity to the role, and the result is one of the most chilling performances by an actress in 1970s cinema. But getting that performance was not simple or comfortable. Dunaway was a fiercely committed actress who believed in total immersion in her characters. She asked deep questions about Diana's psychology, her childhood, her desires, and her fears. She wanted to understand not just what Diana did, but why she did it. Director Sidney Lumet appreciated her dedication, but sometimes found himself in long, exhausting debates about motivation and character before a single camera rolled. Other cast members occasionally found her intensity overwhelming. Scenes that should have been filmed quickly took longer because Dunaway pushed and questioned and explored. But the results were undeniable. Every scene she appears in crackles with dangerous energy. When Diana talks about ratings, you believe she would trade anything, any human cost, for better numbers. Chayefsky's script called for Diana to be the embodiment of a system without conscience, and Dunaway made that abstraction frighteningly real. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for this performance, making Network one of the rare films in history where both a lead actor and actress won Oscars for the same movie. That almost never happens. Dunaway later spoke about how difficult the character was to leave behind after filming ended. Some roles follow you home. Diana Christensen was one of those roles. What looked cold on screen burned like fire behind the camera. Number 16. William Holden's Quiet Heartbreak. While Peter Finch raged and Faye Dunaway maneuvered, William Holden played Max Schumacher, the older executive who watches his world collapse with quiet, dignified sadness. Holden was already a legend by the time he made Network. He had starred in Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, and Bridge on the River Kwai. He was one of Hollywood's great stars. But by 1976, many people in the industry had started to think of him as a relic, a man from an older era of filmmaking that had already passed. Holden used that feeling. He channeled it directly into Max, a man who represents old values, old journalism, and old decency in a world that has stopped caring about any of those things. Max watches television become something monstrous and feels powerless to stop it. He has an affair with Diana and realizes, slowly and painfully, that she is incapable of real emotional connection, that everything with her, including love, is ultimately about power and programming. Holden played all of this with restraint and grief that broke audiences' hearts. There are no big speeches for Max, no moments of explosive anger. He simply watches, understands, and suffers. Some critics felt that Holden's performance was the quiet center around which all the film's noise and spectacle rotated. He was the human scale against which the movie's extremes could be measured. He was also, in many ways, playing himself. An older man watching an industry he loved transform into something he no longer recognized. That was not just a performance. That was confession. Number 15. The Mad as Hell. Speech was almost improvised. The most famous moment in Network is Howard Beale's great speech, the one where he commands his television audience to go to their windows and scream, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore." It is one of the most quoted lines in film history. It has appeared in protest signs, political speeches, pop songs, and countless other films. And the way that scene was filmed carried its own kind of electricity. Peter Finch delivered the speech with such force and conviction that the crew on set reportedly stood completely still and silent while he performed it. Camera operators forgot to breathe. Lighting technicians stared. Grips and gaffers who had been moving quietly around the set stopped moving altogether. When Finch finished, there was a long pause before anyone said anything. Then the room broke into applause from the crew, the extras, the production assistants, everyone. It was spontaneous and unplanned, the way real applause always is. Sidney Lumet said he had never seen a crew react that way to a performance in all his years of directing. He knew immediately that the scene was something extraordinary. What made it even more remarkable was how completely Finch inhabited the character in that moment. He was not performing a speech. He was a man speaking truth that had been burning inside him for years. The camera simply had the privilege of being there to catch it. What Chayefsky wrote on the page was already powerful. What Finch brought to it turned those words into something that felt like weather, like a storm passing through a room. That was not just acting. That was transformation. Number 14. Sidney Lumet directed with invisible hands. Sidney Lumet was one of the most skilled directors of his generation, but his greatest skill was one that nobody in the audience ever noticed. He was a master of creating conditions for actors to do their best work, and then getting completely out of the way. Lumet believed that the director's job was to build the environment, set the tone, solve the problems, and then trust the actors to fill the space with truth. He did not believe in pushing actors into performances. He believed in pulling performances out of them by creating the right atmosphere on set. With network, this meant detailed preparation. Lumet met with each major cast member extensively before filming began. They discussed the characters, the world of the film, and the emotional landscape of every scene. By the time cameras rolled, the actors felt safe and understood. They knew what the director needed and trusted that he would protect their most vulnerable choices. Lumet also worked with extraordinary speed. He was famous in the industry for being efficient without being rushed, a rare combination. Scenes that other directors might have spent 2 days filming, Lumet captured in hours. This efficiency came from intense preparation, not shortcuts. He knew exactly what he needed before he ever walked on set. The result was a film that feels simultaneously intimate and epic, a story about big ideas told through deeply human moments. Lumet's invisible hand is everywhere in network, shaping and guiding without ever being seen. The best directing, he often said, is the directing that disappears. In network, he disappeared perfectly. What looked effortless had taken a lifetime of craft to achieve. Number 13. The shocking boardroom scene. There is a scene in network that stops people cold every time they see it. Howard Beale, the raging prophet of television, is summoned before Arthur Jensen, the all-powerful head of the corporation that owns the network. Jensen sits Beale in a vast dark boardroom and delivers a speech about the true nature of the world. Not nations, not governments, not people, money, international business, the flow of capital across borders. It is hypnotic, terrifying, and somehow feels more honest than almost anything else in the film. The actor who played Jensen was Ned Beatty, and his role was tiny by any measure. He appeared in only one scene. One. And yet his Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor that year was one of the most widely supported in Hollywood. Critics who had been divided about the film agreed almost universally that Beatty's single scene was something almost supernatural in its force. Lumet filmed the scene in a way that made Jensen feel enormous and Howard Beale feel small, not just physically, but spiritually. The darkness of the boardroom, the vast empty space, the way Beatty moved and spoke all combined to create a sense of terrifying power. It was designed to feel like a sermon delivered by the wrong kind of God. Chayefsky wrote the speech over several drafts, each one more intense than the last. He wanted audiences to feel simultaneously repelled and convinced, to understand why someone as smart as Howard Beale might surrender to this vision even though it was monstrous. The scene works almost too well. Viewers sometimes leave the theater feeling as though they have been lectured to by something they cannot name. One scene, one actor, something unforgettable. Number 12. The film was shot. Mostly on real locations. Hollywood in the 1970s was in the middle of a revolution. Studios that had once built enormous indoor sets for everything, streets, offices, newsrooms, Apartments were beginning to send their cameras out into the real world. Sidney Lumet was one of the great champions of this approach. He believed that real locations gave films a texture and truth that no set designer, no matter how talented, could fully replicate. For network, this meant filming in actual television studios, real office buildings, genuine New York City streets, and authentic spaces that carried the weight of real use. The newsroom scenes were filmed in an actual working newsroom. The corporate offices were filmed in real corporate offices. The New York City exterior scenes were filmed on actual New York streets with real people walking by in the background. Not extras directed to move naturally, but actual citizens of the city, going about their actual lives. This created a strange and powerful effect. The film felt simultaneously like fiction and like a documentary. Audiences watching network could not always be sure where the movie ended and reality began. That blurring was intentional. Lumet wanted viewers to feel that the story was happening right now, not on some constructed Hollywood version of the world. The challenge was significant. Real locations are unpredictable. Traffic noise disrupts audio. Lighting conditions change. Members of the public wander into shots. Schedules collapse. Lumet navigated all of it with the pragmatic grace of a filmmaker who loved the real world more than any set he might build to replace it. What looked natural took enormous discipline to capture. The chaos you do not see was always there, just outside the frame. Number 11. The love affair that meant everything. One of the most underappreciated elements of network is its love story. In the middle of all the satire and rage and corporate spectacle, there is a genuine and deeply felt relationship between Max Schumacher and Diana Christensen. They are opposites in almost every way. Max is warm, tired, and humane. Diana is brilliant, cold, and driven purely by professional ambition. They fall into an affair that both of them handle badly. Max because he is weak in the face of Diana's intoxicating energy. Diana because she is ultimately incapable of feeling what love requires. The breakup scene between Max and Diana, where Max finally tells Diana what she truly is and what their relationship has always lacked, is written and performed with heartbreaking precision. William Holden delivers a long speech that indicts not just Diana, but the entire system she represents. He tells her that she is the television, that she is corporate America, that she has turned herself into a product and can no longer feel anything real. And Faye Dunaway's response, the way Diana sits very still and very composed and says almost nothing, is more devastating than any angry reply could have been, because it confirms everything Max has said. She cannot even perform grief convincingly. The relationship at the heart of network is not a love story with a happy ending. It is a love story designed to show what love costs in a world that has forgotten how to value anything that cannot be measured in ratings. What felt like romance was really a diagnosis. The sadness was the point. Number 10. How the network executives reacted. You might expect that real television executives would have hated network. After all, the film was a savage and unrelenting attack on exactly what they did for a living. It called their industry corrupt, soulless, and destructive. It suggested that they would sacrifice any human being, any principle, any fragment of journalistic integrity for better ratings. And yet the reaction inside the television industry was complicated in a way nobody quite expected. Many executives loved the film. They quoted it, they praised it, Some of them screened it for their staff. Some even gave it as a gift to colleagues. At first, this seemed strange. How could people enjoy a movie that attacked them so directly? The answer, when it came, was both funny and deeply sad. Many television executives felt that network was not really attacking them. It was attacking somebody else, somebody worse, somebody further gone. They all recognized the behavior in the film, but nobody recognized themselves in it. Every executive watching the movie thought the satire described their competitors, not their own network. This reaction perfectly illustrated the very blindness the film was trying to expose. Network was attacking a system, and the people inside that system were incapable of seeing themselves as part of it. They laughed at the movie's villain while being the movie's villain. Chayefsky, had he known about this reaction, might have found it either darkly funny or utterly despairing. Probably both. The satire worked on everyone except the people it was aimed at. That was not failure. That was the sharpest possible proof of the film's thesis. Number 9. The budget was surprisingly small. For a film that feels enormous, full of epic speeches, large set pieces, and the weight of cultural prophecy, Network was made on a remarkably modest budget by Hollywood standards. The total budget was approximately $8 million, which even in 1976 was considered lean for a major studio production with a cast of Oscar-winning actors. This was not an accident. Sidney Lumet was famously efficient with money, and he believed that financial constraints often pushed filmmakers toward better creative decisions. When you cannot spend your way out of a problem, you are forced to find a smarter solution. The decision to shoot on real locations rather than constructed sets saved enormous amounts of money. Lumet's rapid shooting schedule, he rarely spent more time on a scene than he absolutely needed, kept costs from inflating. The crew was tight and experienced. There was very little waste in the production. What is remarkable is that nothing in the finished film feels cheap. It does not look or sound like a movie that was pinching pennies. It looks like a movie that knew exactly what it needed and spent its resources precisely where they would have the greatest impact. The performances are so powerful that audiences are rarely aware of the physical settings around them. The words and the faces and the emotions fill the frame completely. In a sense, the restrained budget forced the film to rely on its greatest strengths, its writing and its actors, rather than on spectacle and scale. Sometimes a smaller canvas is exactly the right size for the painting. What looked expensive was built on discipline and intelligence. Number 8. The terrorist subplot was completely serious. One of the most extreme elements of Network is the subplot involving a group of radical domestic terrorists called the Ecumenical Liberation Army. In the film, these terrorists are given their own primetime television show, negotiating their contracts, managing their public image, and arguing about profit participation even as they continue planning violent acts. The first time most audiences encountered this storyline, many of them laughed. It seemed like the most obviously satirical element of the film, the one part that could never actually happen. And yet Chayefsky was completely serious about it. He was not inventing absurdity for comic effect. He was extrapolating directly from real trends he observed in 1976. The way media coverage was already transforming violent extremists into celebrities. the way networks competed furiously for any content that drove ratings, the way the entertainment logic of television was beginning to consume everything it touched. The terrorist subplot in Network was not a joke. It was a warning wrapped in such extreme clothing that it could slip past audiences' defenses. Chayefsky knew that people resist direct warnings. They argue with them, dismiss them, explain them away. But if you make the warning funny enough, shocking enough, and strange enough, it gets inside before the defenses go up. The Ecumenical Liberation Army scenes are designed to make audiences laugh and then immediately feel uncomfortable about why they are laughing. Because the logic of what is happening on screen is completely coherent. It makes a terrible kind of sense, and that is exactly what should frighten everyone who watches it. The joke was never really a joke. It was the truth dressed up in its most uncomfortable clothes. Number 7. Chayefsky's original vision was even darker. If you think Network is bleak, and it is genuinely, powerfully bleak, you might be interested to know that Paddy Chayefsky's original vision for the film was even darker. Early drafts of the screenplay contained scenes and ideas that were considered too extreme even for a film already pushing every boundary it could find. Some scenes were cut for length. Others were modified to make the satire slightly less overwhelming. The tonal balance of the film, which manages to be both devastating and watchable, required careful calibration. Too much darkness and audiences would shut down emotionally. Too much comedy and the serious message would dissolve. Chayefsky and Lumet worked together to find the precise mixture that would allow the film to function as entertainment while still delivering its full critical payload. But traces of Chayefsky's original darker instincts survive throughout the finished film. The ending in particular, which involves the literal murder of Howard Beale on live television as a ratings strategy, is so extreme that many first-time viewers cannot quite believe they are seeing it. And yet, it is completely consistent with every other piece of logic the film has established. If the network would do everything else we have watched them do, why would murder be off the table? The ending is not a shock twist. It is the inevitable conclusion of a film that has been building its argument with perfect, terrible logic from the very first scene. Chayefsky wanted no escape route for his audience. He wanted them to follow the argument all the way to the end, and then sit with what it meant. What he held back was even worse than what he showed. Darkness has its own discipline. Number 6. The film that launched 4 Oscar nominations in Acting Network made history at the Academy Awards in a way that has never been repeated. The film received 4 acting nominations for Peter Finch, Faye Dunaway, William Holden, and Beatrice Straight. All 4 were in the running for Oscars in the same year for the same film. And then the night of the ceremony arrived, and the results were extraordinary. Peter Finch won Best Actor posthumously. Faye Dunaway won Best Actress. And Beatrice Straight won Best Supporting Actress for her performance as Max's wife, Louise, a role that consisted of essentially one major scene. Straight's win set a record that still stands in Hollywood. Her entire performance, the parts that made it to the final cut, amounts to roughly 5 minutes and 40 seconds of screen time. 5 minutes and 40 seconds that won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. That is the shortest performance ever to win in that category. In her single scene, Straight played a woman learning that her husband is leaving her for another woman. The emotions she conveyed, shock, grief, dignity, fury, love, loss, were so complete and so concentrated in those few minutes that the Academy felt compelled to honor them. It was a reminder that great acting is not about quantity. It is about truth per second. Strait packed an entire emotional life into a few minutes of screen time and came away with the most prestigious award in the American film industry. 3 actors from one film winning Oscars in the same year. That had never happened before. It has not happened since. Network stands alone. Number 5. The film was almost turned into a stage musical. Here is something that might surprise you. In the years after Network's release, as its reputation grew and its predictions continued to come true, various people in the entertainment industry began exploring the idea of adapting it for other formats. There were conversations about theatrical productions. There were talks about television adaptations, which carried a delicious irony given the film's content. And seriously, there were sustained efforts to develop Network as a stage musical. This seems almost impossible to imagine at first. How do you turn a film about the destruction of human values into a musical with songs and choreography? How do you preserve the film's ferocious intellectual energy in a format traditionally associated with spectacle and uplift? The answer, it turned out, required enormous creative courage and a willingness to lean directly into the absurdity rather than away from it. A stage adaptation of Network did eventually reach the theater. Not as a musical in the traditional sense, but as a critically acclaimed theatrical production that used the form of live performance to add new layers to the story. The live audience watching actors perform on stage, knowing they were being watched, created a strange and perfect mirror for the film's central argument about the relationship between audiences and the spectacle they consume. Theater-goers found themselves simultaneously watching the play and being aware of themselves watching the play, which was precisely the uncomfortable self-consciousness that Chayefsky originally intended. The transition from screen to stage did not dilute Network. It found new ways to ask the same old questions. What looked like adaptation was actually excavation. The story had more truth left inside it than anyone realized. Number 4. The real television anchors who inspired Howard Beale. Howard Beale did not emerge from pure imagination. Paddy Chayefsky was a careful researcher, and when he created Howard Beale, he drew on real people and real events from the world of American television journalism. Several real television anchors of the 1960s and 70s influenced the character. The pressures of live television, the long careers that slowly eroded personalities, the strange celebrity that came with being a nightly presence in millions of American homes. All of these elements were real, observed, and documented by Chayefsky before they became fiction. One particular inspiration was the general trajectory of certain news figures who had been giants of their industry and then found themselves slowly marginalized as television changed around them. Men who had built careers on a certain idea of journalism, serious, responsible, committed to truth, who then watched that idea become commercially inconvenient. The way the industry treated these figures, the way it used them and then discarded them, was part of what fueled Chayefsky's rage and shaped Howard Beale's story. There was also the very real phenomenon of on-air breakdowns and unusual behavior by news figures under extreme professional and personal pressure. Television is a medium that puts enormous stress on the human beings who work inside it, and that stress sometimes produces public moments of extraordinary vulnerability. Chayefsky took all of these observations, concentrated them, and amplified them into Howard Beale, a character who was not one specific person, but was, in a terrible sense, a portrait of what the industry could do to anyone it consumed. The fiction was assembled from facts too uncomfortable to be told as facts. Number 3. The script that won the Writers Guild's highest honor. Paddy Chayefsky's screenplay for Network is widely considered one of the greatest original screenplays ever written. It has won awards, been analyzed in books, and been taught in film schools around the world for decades. But the honor that perhaps matters most to writers came from Chayefsky's own community. The Writers Guild of America, the professional organization that represents Hollywood screenwriters, has over its history selected a small group of screenplays that it considers the greatest achievements in the craft of screenwriting. Network is on that list, to be placed on that list by your fellow writers, the people who understand exactly how difficult the work is, who know every shortcut you could have taken and chose not to take, who recognize the quality of every decision on the page. Is a different kind of honor than winning a popular award. It is a recognition from people who cannot be fooled. Chayefsky was a writer's writer. He cared obsessively about language, structure, character, and argument. He revised constantly. He threw away vast amounts of material that didn't meet his standard, even when others told him it was good enough. The final screenplay for Network is the product of extraordinary discipline, not just talent, which Chayefsky had in abundance, but the even rarer quality of demanding the absolute best from himself, even when something merely very good was already on the page. The words that Howard Beale speaks, the arguments that Diana Christensen makes, the quiet grief in Max Schumacher's dialogue, none of it happened easily or quickly. It was built word by a craftsman who believed that language was the most powerful tool a human being could hold. Every word earned its place. Number 2. The film that changed. How America talked about television before Network, there was certainly criticism of television. Academics and intellectuals worried about its effects. Journalists occasionally wrote pieces questioning the medium's influence, but these conversations happened mostly in universities and literary magazines, places where most Americans never encountered them. Network brought those conversations into the mainstream. After 1976, ordinary people who had never read an academic paper about media theory were walking out of movie theaters asking questions that those papers had been asking for years. What is television doing to us? Are we being entertained or manipulated? Is the news actually news, or is it a performance designed to keep us watching? What does it mean that the things we are most afraid of have become the things we most reliably tune in to see? These questions entered American popular culture in a way they never had before, and they entered through the door that Network opened. The phrase, "mad as hell and not going to take it anymore," became a genuine piece of the cultural language, repeated in contexts far removed from the film, used by people who had never seen it, understood instinctively by audiences who had never heard of Paddy Chayefsky. That is what happens when a piece of art captures something true and says it in a way that cannot be unfelt. It spreads. It becomes part of how people think and speak. Decades later, every serious conversation about social media, cable news, and the attention economy still returns, sooner or later, to network. The film is not just a historical artifact. It is an active participant in ongoing arguments. Some films age. Network keeps getting younger. What started as criticism became a language everyone uses. Number 1, the ending that audiences could not forget. And here we arrive at the most important fact of all, the one that sits at the very center of everything network is and everything it means. The ending. Howard Beale, the mad prophet of the airwaves, has served his purpose. His ratings have begun to decline. The network that made him a star and exploited his breakdown for profit has calculated that he is now worth more dead than alive. And so they arrange for him to be assassinated on live television. He is shot during his broadcast. The cameras catch everything. The network executives immediately begin discussing the next program. And the final lines of the film, delivered in voiceover, describe Howard Beale as the first man ever killed because of bad ratings. When Network premiered in 1976, this ending shocked audiences. It felt like the ultimate grotesque exaggeration, the final proof that the film was satire, that it was making a point by going further than reality ever would. And yet, within a few decades, reality television would regularly put human beings in situations of genuine physical and psychological danger for the entertainment of audiences who watched their suffering as sport. News programs would develop whole formats designed around capturing moments of human tragedy at maximum emotional impact. The logic of ratings, which the film presents as absolute, as the only value that ultimately matters, would come to govern not just television, but the entire attention economy of the Internet age. Howard Beale was killed for bad ratings, and the world looked at that ending and slowly stopped being shocked by it. That is the most frightening thing network ever accomplished. It did not just predict the future, it made the future feel inevitable. And then it arrived. Bonus fact: the scene that was written but never filmed here is a story that almost no one knows. A secret from inside the making of Network that did not make it into any version of the film audiences have ever seen. Paddy Chayefsky wrote a scene late in his drafting process that he ultimately decided not to include in the final screenplay. The scene involved Howard Beale, not in his rage or his prophetic fury, but in a moment of quiet clarity. A private moment, away from the cameras, away from the audience, away from the network executives who had built an empire on his breakdown. In this scene, Beale sits alone in a small room backstage at the studio. The cameras are dark, the microphones are off. No one is watching. And he speaks, quietly, calmly, completely rationally, about what has happened to him and what it means. He is not mad in this scene. He is not inspired or prophetic or electrically alive. He is simply a tired, intelligent man who can see exactly what has been done to him and to everyone around him, and who understands that understanding it makes no practical difference. The scene was not filmed for several reasons. Chayefsky ultimately felt that it gave audiences too much comfort, a moment of clarity that let them feel that someone inside the story could see the truth. The power of Network comes partly from its refusal to offer that comfort. There is no wise observer who stands apart from the madness and sees it clearly and survives it. The system consumes everything it touches, including the people who understand it best. The unfilmed scene would have provided a small escape hatch from the film's most suffocating argument. And Chayefsky did not believe in escape hatches. He believed in sitting with the discomfort until it taught you something. The scene was written. The scene was good. The scene was cut precisely because it was too kind. Sometimes the most important creative decisions are the ones that say no to something excellent in service of something true. Old tools, new magic. Network is a film about anger, but underneath the anger, it is a film about grief. Grief for a world that was losing its ability to tell the difference between what was real and what was performance. Grief for journalism, for dignity, for the human beings who get used up by systems that care only about numbers. Grief for all the quiet, decent people like Max Schumacher who watch everything they love transform into something they no longer recognize. What makes Network endure, what makes it feel more relevant with every passing year rather than less, is that its grief is our grief. We have all watched things we valued become spectacle. We have all felt the helplessness of understanding what is happening and being unable to stop it. We have all, at some point, wanted to open a window and scream. Paddy Chayefsky and Sidney Lumet and Peter Finch and Faye Dunaway and William Holden and every person who poured their talent into this film gave us a mirror. And sometimes a mirror is the most generous thing art can offer. Not comfort, not escape, but clarity. The chance to see ourselves honestly and choose what to do next. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.